Welcome to Tossing Grenade the Windmills. Windmills.
Precyber, Chapter 39, by T.C. Ricks and Ken Leitner. Emily remembered the day she had discovered Clarke was alive while she rode the MARTA train towards 5 Point Station. Clarke had asked her to take the train instead of driving because of the GPS locators on all e-cars. She also had to leave her phone behind, and she worried what she might do if she got lost or if Clarke failed to show. She turned her mind to happy moments to avoid focusing on those fears. Unfortunately, Clarke was not a very reliable person. Emily worried the most about whether or not he would show up on time. 5 Points was not a particularly safe station. MARTA had never privatized like most of the other city services. The city had never had the resources to properly maintain or police their train stations, and no corporation wanted to touch Atlanta's great white elephant. Yet somehow, almost mystically, it managed to go on functioning despite the corruption and incompetence. The police the city could hire were from the bottom of the bucket. The pay scale sucked wind, so many MARTA police were near criminals themselves. Worse, at this late hour, the city could only afford to run the trains once every 90 minutes. As the train pulled onto the station, she stared out the window at the unsavory crowd of homeless beggars waiting for the train. She shuddered as her fears surfaced again. She prayed that Clarke would meet her as they had agreed. He told her that he would meet her outside of the station and guide her to Gabriel's building. No one knew where the building was outside of Gabriel and his group. Even Emily's underground contact did not know, and she was always wondering about that. On the one hand, she could totally understand a need-to-know basis, but there was always something particularly secretive about how Gabriel did things. It had helped to add to his aura of mystery and enhance his reputation in the Revolution. She was looking forward to a chance to peek behind the curtain. The door slid open as the train stopped at 5 Points, and Emily stood up at the exit. She looked around once more before coming onto the station platform. The station itself was a poster for the value of a corporation. Of course, corporations focus on profit, so an extensive public utility like MARTA would not exist without government. 5 Points looked like something out of a zombie apocalypse movie. Many of the fluorescent lights above flickered weakly. Most of the rest were dark. The granite walls of the station sported graffiti tags from local hoodlums. Some people had romantic views about graffiti, but none of this was the least bit attractive. No one of any talent had tagged down here, and most that had tagged on top of the other ones that had already been here in the first place. The end result was a jumble of obscene words and bad grammar. The regular breeze that accompanied each train had piled loose debris in every conceivable corner of the station, and as Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light, some of those piles focused into human beings huddled up against the wind. A few of the disenfranchised human forms stood up and walked up to the departing passengers. One headed directly to her. "Emily?" said the form. Emily recognized Clarke's voice immediately and let out a sigh of relief. She replied, "Clarke! It's good to see you again. Let's get out of here, though. Just follow me. If you lose me, just stay put and I'll come back for you." The Clarkian mound of rags moved away and down an underground passage. Only then did Emily notice fairly new jeans peeking out of the bottom of the mound. Was this some kind of disguise? Emily followed him underground for what seemed like a few blocks, and then they walked out into the sun amongst some abandoned office buildings. Emily knew this part of town. It was somewhat south of the station and forgotten mostly by residents of the city. Sections of Atlanta often came and went in cycles. However, this area had been down for quite a while, and the buildings showed signs of urban decay. Emily had hoped to remember the route for her next trip here, but she gave up. Clarke had taken too many shortcuts through derelict buildings. However, the next time they ducked their heads to clamber into another derelict, Clarke had told her that they had arrived. He guided her over a stairwell, which they then took 2 floors up to the shelter. Clarke told Emily that this was the part of the side benefit of the operation, as he walked to the side closet and began shedding his costume. Emily found herself staring when Clarke pulled out the last bit off and revealed his naked chest. Her eyes scanned his tan body from his toned biceps to his rippling stomach muscles. Emily was not the type to date based on looks. However, Clarke's new level of fitness did pique her interest. Her eyes dropped below Clarke's six-pack abs to a strand of dark hair rising above the waistband of his jeans. Luckily, Clarke seemed too busy to notice while she stared. He said, "I usually take the stairs up, as the elevator is quite old. It's 14 floors. Hey, you look tired." Emily had only honestly heard the word elevator. She was so distracted. But as Clarke pulled on a tight drama T-shirt, she came back to her senses and replied, "Yes, elevator. Where is it? Follow me." Emily tried to remember why Clarke had made her so angry right before his alleged death. She remembered the dinner date she had stormed away from. What frustrated her was that Clarke had lacked focus and always seemed to get things messed up. However, from what she saw here, he had clearly turned a corner. There was a confidence in that response that she had not remembered ever hearing from him. Clarke guided them to the elevator and pressed the call button. They stood there for a bit. She smiled at him, and he smiled at her. She asked herself how much of what she was feeling was just a joy at seeing an old friend alive. It didn't matter. She felt it, and so it was real. They stared at each other until Clarke said, "Want me to show you around once we get to the top?" Emily nodded. "What about your stuff? The costume? It's kind of communal material for whoever needs it. Anyway, if someone takes that, they probably need it more than we do. I can't believe you've never been here." Rich peals of laughter emitted from Emily's throat. "Clarke, over 90% of the revolution never sees but one or two people. It's cellular in nature in case one cell gets compromised. I was never brought here until now because they never had a good enough reason to do so." Clarke smiled. "Well, I'm glad you're here now." The doors slid open and they began to go up. Clarke was going to take her to the 14th floor where they hid their operations headquarters, but between the 3rd and 4th floor the elevator stopped. She looked at Clarke, and she had been grabbed hold of him, tightly gripping his arm and feeling the muscles there. She expected Clarke to panic, but he stood calmly as the elevator groaned and lurched to the left. Elevators were not supposed to do that. Emily gripped him tighter. The elevator lurched to the right. Emily screamed. The snapping sound resumed, and then the elevator began to slide down. Clarke quipped, "This is why I take the stairs." Emily knew Clarke was afraid. She had known him too long not to recognize the slight wavering in his voice. However, she laughed despite herself at his joke. He had made her feel comfortable for at least the moment. Clarke said, "We're only 3 floors up, and we aren't falling that fast. We're going to be okay, Emily." The car lurched again, this time throwing them up into the air, making them both land on the ground. It went down again. The lights went out. 3 more times the elevator dropped until it eventually slammed with an unholy clang onto the ground. Clarke felt the wind knocked out of his lungs. They laid in a bundle in the dark, tilted elevator car, and they laid in a bundle in the dark, tilted elevator car. Emily's hand rested between Clarke's legs, touching him somewhere he had no complaint about it being touched. Her hand pressed down as she pushed herself up. The feeling sent blood rushing to the last place he expected. "Are you okay?" Clarke asked. "I'm fine, Clarke," Emily replied. Emily felt the area under her hand move a bit and finally realized where her hand had come to rest. She decided to take advantage of the situation. Her hand moved up and down and unbuttoned Clarke's jeans, and then she rolled over on top of him, and they moved to face forward, slowly seeking a place to kiss. When their lips met, it sent a jolt of recognition through her. She loved this man. They enjoyed each other before, and she missed him. They spent hours in the darkness, reuniting their bodies. Their passion, so long suppressed, found outlet in their lovemaking, and when they finished, they embraced and slept a few more hours. They awoke the next morning refreshed. Their white-hot near-death elevator experience, make-up sex, had cleared the air. Whatever arguments or frustrations they had felt recently were forgotten. They dressed, climbed out of the elevator, and made their way to the stairs with found energy of recent lovemaking. When they reached the right floor, Clarke introduced Emily to Gabriel, and then Clarke showed Emily to his new room. Gabriel had given Clarke a room on the floor just beneath the penthouse. When Clarke asked why, he explained, "Well, first of all, you're moving up in the organization. You showed a lot of fresh ideas and new ways of doing things, but also in addition to that, it puts you near the ShadowNet terminal. I think that's where you're going to do us the most good." Emily helped him get to the room in good shape. They looked all over the empty rooms on the floor to find the best bed that they could find. They also raided some of the empty offices to find shelves and slowly rebuilt Clarke's library. Over the next weekend or two, they were able to find even more books to fill it up with. It didn't matter what the books were on. Their mere presence made the room feel more like home. The computer terminals were a bit of an overkill. He wanted to reset up to 5 or 6, but Emily was not happy with the idea. Emily asked, "Why do you need so many?" "Well, research." "You want to set up more gold farming, don't you?" "The revolution could use the money." Can't you set up those on the server in virtual machines?" Clarke was surprised. "You know what a virtual machine is?" Emily looked incredulous. "Clarke, I might be a veterinarian, but I'm not ignorant about computers. I mean, you have to know about that kind of stuff if you're gathering information for the revolution." Yeah, right." She shook her head, smiled, and kissed him. That was the end of that. Clarke had to admit that the main reason he wanted them was because that many computers had become a symbol of progress, of hope. It gave him a feeling that things were moving forward, even when they actually moved sideways. But sideways or not, things felt better. He had Emily back, he had his job back, and he even had a place to live. Hell, this place was better than the last place. He loved the spectacular view. You could see all of downtown and a good portion of Decatur. You could see both the sunrise and the sunset on the corners of the room when you opened all the shades. If you ignored the occasional Aqua Noir helicopter going out to oppress someone somewhere, you could also almost pretend it was like old times and that things were going well. Emily helped him forget a lot of what had been done to him, but things still gnawed at him. It wasn't just unjust, it was insidious. Clarke could not help but have a desire to keep digging for things. And so during the week, Clarke worked up on his FBI files. He had more focus than he had before, and he began to see things he'd never noticed. He also cross-referenced the data against Gabriel's Revolution database. Gabriel's database contained reports on corporate abuses. The FBI database contained reports of suspicious behavior against corporations. Clarke began to find linkages. He fretted initially over turning over some of his findings to his boss at the FBI. He worried the findings could create more work for the old bureaucrat. However, his boss laughed. "This isn't our jurisdiction, Clarke. I just transfer those things over to the FBI now and make them look bad." He was working his way through the office files from recent to the most oldest when he ran across a file on Balthazar. Apparently, his old teammate had been posting anti-establishment rhetoric on a Revolution fan site. The weird thing was that it all started about the time Balthazar's mother died, and his mother's death was in Gabriel's database. According to Gabriel's database, the mother had been shot 10 years ago during a corporate police raid. The NPIGs claimed to have a warrant, but they never produced it, and Balthazar tried to push the case, but got nowhere with the limited amount of funds he had. Balthazar claimed his mother knew something, and the corporate silenced her. Clarke was elated. He had finally found a real clue to Balthazar's death. It was not much, but it was 10 times what he'd discovered before. He could not wait for Emily's next weekend to tell her. He did decide not to pass this one up to his boss, and decided to pursue it himself. He could always turn it over later.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
and Red Anvil Amalgamated.
to fight the forces of evil!